computing. So the fundamental thing is, even though we might have a perception that there is something new, fundamentally there is nothing that is new. Communication, we right now are using Zoom to communicate, we have video calls, but fundamentally it is still communication, which has been there since the beginning of creation. You look at wars, you look at pandemics. We think that COVID is something that is new, but it is not. There have been pandemics since the fall. There have been pandemics since the fall. We might think, okay, how long will it take for COVID to get over? We just need to look back at history and say, okay, pandemics come and pandemics go. So these repetitions that are there, we might think that they are new, just like this question and posed in verse 10. He says, is there something new? We might think that there is something new, but essentially, fundamentally, it has all been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things yet to be among those who come after. Man tends to forget things, Let's just take this case of a pandemic like COVID-19. We might think that this is something new, as I said, but it is not. Something just has been happening, and we have just forgotten about this. Just take 100 years ago, there was another pandemic that crippled the world. Even now there is. So fundamentally, there is nothing new. Things have been the same since the creation, or since the fall, to be more accurate. So what's the conclusion to the matter? Conclusion is, no matter how much man tries to toil, he cannot change the fundamental things that are happening around the world. Death. We have done great scientific advancement in medical technology. Yet, the maximum age at which the life expectancy ceiling is set at 120 years, approximately. That has not increased since 100 years. No matter what man has big aspirations for, the fundamental processes, the problems in the world remains the same. There is no change. And that is why Solomon says there is no gain by all the toil. In the grand scheme of things, all work that man does has no gain. Everything is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. All right, let's go to the second passage. He says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun. Behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be counted. So again, we see an introduction, because once we have the abstract, Solomon is going to the main content of the book. So he gives another introduction. He says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. Now it shows that, the undertaking that the king is doing, he has the authority, he has the resources to do it. Later on in chapter 2, we see that Solomon goes after every kind of pleasure that is there. We know that is the limits to which man can go, because Solomon is king. He is the king over all Israel. He was a prosperous king. He had the resources, he has the authority to do that. And so we know that the undertaking that Solomon is doing is something that is exhaustive. It's not a half done work, but it's exhaustive, it's complete. And so that's who the author is. That's the one who is doing the experiment for us. So he does this experiment. He says he applied his heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. So this fundamentally is the same thing that Solomon is doing in the first passage. So he looks at all the work, everything that is done under heaven, right? Every aspect of man. And let's see at his conclusion. So the first conclusion it is an unhappy business God has given to the children of man to be busy with. A side note, many people think that Solomon or the author of Ecclesiastes is looking at the world without God and finding no meaning in it. That is not completely true. No, Solomon is not an atheist. He is not looking at the world as if God is not there. He is looking at the world knowing that God is in full control of it. And because he knows God is in full control of it, he finds he is morally distraught because he knows that God is in control of it, yet there is no meaning. Yet there is this vain repetition. There is all the problems in the world. Essentially, you know, you guys have heard of the problem of evil, right? If God is there and if he is good and if he's all powerful, why there is evil? Fundamentally, that's throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon is distraught because he thinks he is so under so much vexation because he sees there is a God who is giving the children of man some work to do, but that work in itself is vanity. It's not doing any much good to make the world a better place or anything. So he sees that it is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. God has sovereignly appointed man some work. And the interesting part or the heavy part of it is that it is an unhappy business. Why is it unhappy? He says, I have seen everything that is done under the sun. Verse 14. And behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. Why? What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. So he answers this question with a parable, with a proverb. He says, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Something that is crooked because God has made it crooked. And man trying to straighten it up, man is unable to do so. And Solomon concludes, that's vanity. Something that is crooked remains crooked, no matter how much man tries it. Result, vanity. What is lacking cannot be counted. If something is lacking, if something is missing, it's very difficult to count it. Like William Barrick says in his book, uh, if something is not there, it's difficult to quantify it. Like what is lacking cannot be counted. Um, just to give you a modern example, I work with hard disks, so therefore you'll have a lot of illustration with, data. Um, uh, 20 years ago, we thought that 4 GB of data in a phone was all that you'll ever need. So we lacked 4 GB of data in our phones 20 years ago. And we thought we could say, hey, 24 GB is fine. Fast forward to 2020, and 4 GB is nowhere close to what we need. We lacked then, we still lack now. And we have no idea what number we need to be completely satisfied. We don't know what we have. We don't know what we need. We lack something, we don't know how much will satisfy it. So we see that this strange problem that is there in this world. What is crooked or what is broken, what is not right, will never be made straight. And what is lacking, what is missing, can never be counted. We can never quantify what is not there, what is missing. So Solomon concludes everything. He says, all the work that man does is vanity. We cannot escape the sovereign work or the sovereign decree of the Lord. We cannot escape. Look at the thing. God gave man an unhappy task. That man is toiling, he's working, but he is not able to find a solution for his problems. We cannot escape that. God has done that. And therefore, Solomon says, he is under great distress. He's under vexation. He is like all his vanity and is striving after wind, going after the wind. With that in mind, let's go to the next section. He says, I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. And in this section, we'll see what Solomon is saying. So he first brings about two statements. He says, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. Solomon has great wisdom, quite clear. He has the wisdom that no man has, no man will ever have. And he says, I have had great experience. Now, experience is probably not the best translation. Those of you who use NASB, Elliot, you know, it says observed, right? You know, that is the root of the word. He says, my heart has had, he has observed all the things, he has observed all wisdom and knowledge that is there around him. He has gained all that by observation. He sees the things around and he has assimilated all the wisdom and knowledge. And with that statement, with that experience of wisdom, or with that observation of wisdom and knowledge, he says, applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. So this word to know wisdom and madness and folly, the word know is the same word that, which is not an intellectual knowledge, but it is the same word that is used when it is said, God knows the good and evil, tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The same know, the same know that is used when it says, Adam knew his wife. So it is an intimate knowledge or an intimate understanding. So now Solomon contains, he possesses and he has observed all this wisdom and knowledge that is there with him. And using that wisdom, he says, now I applied my heart to know, to have an intimate understanding or the working of how this wisdom, madness, and folly works. It does not mean that, Solomon was going and acting foolishly, but he was trying to understand how wisdom works in this world, how folly works in this world, and experiencing or understanding the world through that wisdom. And the result is, I perceived that this is also but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. So the result of his expedition was vanity. He tried to look at the world, tried to understand, tried to know wisdom and knowledge. He tried to have an intimate experience with wisdom and madness and folly. And the result was vanity, because he says, in much wisdom is much vexation. The more he knew wisdom, the more he was bitter or frustrated. The more he increased in knowledge, he increased in sorrow. Now, Solomon does not tell exactly how this came about to be in this section, but later on in the coming weeks, we will see why this wisdom and knowledge resulted in vexation. And to give in short, that he sees that those who are wise and those who are fools, they have the same events happening to them. You know, whether the God does the same things in the life of the righteous and the unrighteous, to the wise and for the fool. And so he says, what is the point of all this wisdom? Because whether I am wise or a fool, there is no apparent gain. And so all this wisdom that he has gained, it results in vexation and sorrow. So to conclude these three passages that is there, Solomon undergoes a great expedition. He looks at the world, he looks carefully at the world around him, and he sees things happening around him. He sees the work that men does, and his conclusion is this: there is no point to it. You know, God gave man work to improve the world, to do things, but the result is the same things keep happening over and over again. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. So, man, in all his efforts to pursue wisdom and in all the toil that he does, he cannot redeem himself from the effects of the fall. He cannot redeem himself from the effects of the fall and from the vanity that is there in the world. No matter how much he tries, he cannot redeem himself. He cannot make the world a better place. He cannot mitigate the fall, the effects of the fall. There is vanity all around. This vanity, this repetition continues. So the conclusion, the same conclusion that Ecclesiastes has: fear God and obey Him. Fear God and obey Him, because He is the one who put everything everything under vanity. He's the one who gave the children of man, the sons of men, this work. So therefore, fear Him and obey Him. He comes to the exact opposite conclusion that the nihilist has. A nihilist will look at the world and see vanity, and he will say, there is no point to this world. I am an atheist. There is no God. There is no point, and therefore I will live as I want. If I don't get to live as I want, I will commit suicide. But Solomon, being a theist, he looks at the world, he sees the seeming meaninglessness or vanity in the world, and he sees God's hand in it, and he concludes, fear God and obey Him. And in redemptive history, okay, in the bigger picture, in the larger picture of Bible, we know that this redemption from this vanity of the world comes from God. You know, when man realizes that he cannot save himself, he needs God to save him. He is utterly destitute of the power to change things around him. He needs God to save him. Salvation comes from the Lord. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Even the deliverance from the physical turmoil that is out there. The vanity that is there in this world, uh, God is the Redeemer. God is the one who redeems. I just want you to turn your attention to Romans chapter 8, verses 20. It says, the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. Romans chapter 8, verse 20 and 21. It says, the creation was subjected to futility. The same word that is used in futility is the same word vanity. You see the very hand of God that is there in the vanity in the world. And what is the hope that we have? That God is going to set free the creation. Even the work that we do, the seeming vanity, this endless striving of man to change the world, but it's his inability to do so. Uh, God is the one who redeems. So fear God. God is one day going to redeem it. So fear God. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Not only spiritual salvation or physical salvation, not only a physical, but our entire salvation, all around salvation belongs to the Lord. So fear God, fear God. Right? That's what I wanted to share today. And any questions?
I guess if no one's gonna ask, I was just wondering. I'm not sure if you had went over this and I missed it, but specifically Solomon calling himself the preacher. What is the purpose of him calling himself the preacher, or maybe even specifically like the way that we use the word preacher in today's language? Is this the same idea that Solomon is kind of putting out there as him being the
Um,
preacher?
Not exactly. So the Hebrew word for a preacher is someone who, you know, this is someone who gathers, or, a convener or a collector. He assembles the people and then he speaks, right? So he is, as a wise man, he is like standing there. He is looking at his people, and he's gathering them up and then is speaking to them. So that's the word that is uh, used when he says preacher. So it actually it's the word koholeth, which actually means someone who gathers the people.
Cool. And just wondering, I guess sometimes people might pull like application from this. They might say, oh, our job is to go in, serve as the preacher in the same way Solomon was. Would you say that's an accurate application of the text, or what do you think?
Our job is to be like Solomon in preaching. I don't think that's what Solomon has in mind when he says the words of the preacher. I mean, I don't see that in the text, at least.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a question. So he says that whoever increases knowledge increases in sorrow. So is that why does he say that?
Yes, he says that because, like I told you, in later on, Solomon explains that. So he looks at the people who have knowledge, and I want you to turn to Ecclesiastes 9:15. He says, okay, 9:14. There was a little city, Ecclesiastes 9:14. He says, there was a little city with a few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor, wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. So this wisdom or this knowledge that this poor man had did not benefit him. He faded out into the abyss of history without anyone remembering it. And knowledge is what Solomon is saying is, uh, Solomon had all this knowledge. He tried to. Okay, first of all, Solomon does not explain why knowledge increases sorrow. That Solomon did not tell that. So all that I'm doing is trying to understand from the entire book what could be in the mind of Solomon. Right, so that's the first clarification. Solomon does not tell us why knowledge increases sorrow. He just says that, and he sees that, he observes that, and he tells that. But I think that is because the more you increase in knowledge, the more you want to try to change the world, but then the more you realize that it's not in your power, and that results in sorrow. Right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For 17, I perceive that this also is but the striving after wind. This is a clarification. Is this he's talking about him acquiring knowledge and applying it and all that, like the previous stuff you were saying.
Yes.
So even that part was not.
His pursuit of knowing wisdom, his having understanding of how wisdom works, how madness works, his pursuit to control wisdom. Yes.
I see. So even all that is even like okay.
Yes. So his conclusion is
Huh.
that it is all vanity, and in much wisdom is vexation, it's frustration, it is bitterness is there in that. There is a lot of sorrow in knowledge. He does not explain the details in it, and in fact, the details you'll probably understand as we go through the book of Ecclesiastes. It might not be very clear now, but in short, it is that all his wisdom proved to be worthless.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
couple clarifying
Yeah.
questions? One, so one of your take homes was to fear God. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means? And then also you talked about how salvation comes from God and
Right.
that we have hope that God will redeem creation. Could you talk about that a little bit more, and about how Christ is a part of that picture?
Right. So the first question, what does it mean to fear God? Mm, when someone has power over you, you naturally tend to fear that person, right? The same way that you fear uh, a professor who has the power to grade you well or not. You tend to fear that person, right? That same fear is a similar fear that you have towards God. God, like I told you, Solomon is not an atheist. He's not looking at the world apart from God. He is looking at the world knowing that God is the one who is doing all these things. He is the one who has given the task to the children of man, and he is the one who made the world, who cursed the world in sin, and he's the one who made the crooked things crooked. And we have no power to change that. We have no power to change the world around us. But that burden or that desire is there in us to change the world, and we are under this constant fear. I have a desire. It's not coming to pass unless God redeems. And therefore, we naturally tend to fear God. Once we understand this, we fear God. Your second question was, how does God redeem the world? Was that right?
Yeah, I mean, really, we're looking at salvation, right? And we're looking at a redemption of creation. And I was just wondering if you could unpack a little bit, just the role of Christ in that,
Role of Christ in the creation. So,
and how we can, like, where our hope is really because of Christ. If you could unpack that a little bit.
okay. So now that question itself, it's like a 3-hour long. I mean, I could go on forever on that question. But is there anything specific that is there in your mind I could explain? Otherwise, I will just give a brief overview.
Can you just talk about Jesus Christ a little bit?
Can I talk about Jesus Christ a little bit? All right. The question is where to start. Right. Colossians chapter 2. Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. So he is the head of the body. When he says he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, what Christ did when he came into this world was he started out this new covenant, this new creation. So when he rose from the dead, right, he is the proof or the evidence of this new creation. Just like, Christ had a new body, this is the glorious hope that we have, that just like Christ had a new body as a resurrected glorious body, we are going to have this new and resurrected uh, perfect body. And he is the very image of the new creation, of what we are to be. uh, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law. Christ redeemed us from a dead heart. Christ will redeem us from the effects of sin. So when Christ died on the cross, he secured our eternal salvation, that not only includes our spiritual salvation, but also our physical salvation. That just like he rose from the dead, he has defeated death. And now, though we die, we have this hope that we will be risen, and God is going to make all things new with a new heaven and a new earth. Um, and Christ is going to be king in that world, and all the things that were that went wrong at the fall is going to be made right, and Christ is the means, or Christ is the cause for all of that. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. So this whole redemptive history, this whole thing, the fall happened because God wanted to glorify Christ. The fall happened, everything is put under vanity, because we will realize that in and of ourselves we have no hope. So therefore Christ will come. Christ is our salvation. Christ will come to redeem us, so that all glory will not go to us but to Christ.
I have a quick question, and you
Yeah.
might have already hit this already, but like in verse, can you further explain like what is the definition of wisdom and knowledge, and if they are different, and how so? Because I'm looking at like verse 17, and just because like I read other parts of the Bible that uses these two words,
Right.
so like just want to like clarify what what is the definition of those two words in Ecclesiastes, and for this context.
The definition of wisdom and knowledge. Okay, let me be honest. So wisdom and knowledge is similar term, but I don't think they are quite synonymous. Now, the exact nuances of the word, to be honest, I am not entirely sure. So maybe, and that's a question that I am still wrestling with. What is the exact definition? What is the exact difference between wisdom and knowledge? Some people say wisdom is, knowledge is a factual understanding of things, and wisdom is how to apply that. But I'm not convinced by that difference. But maybe, but I'm still looking through it. This might be a crude difference. Wisdom is how to apply knowledge, while knowledge is a factual understanding of things around the world. I'm not entirely convinced that the differences is that big. But once I get that, maybe I will explain that in detail. But at this point of time, I'm not sure.
Cool, thanks.
Sorry.
No, you're all good. I'm also trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
I just have something to say, like going back to the previous question, keeping Christ in context. Can we say that, I was just reminded of that verse, that our labor in Christ is not in vain. Like Christ, because of Christ, we have a hope, something to look forward to. And because of that, our strife here on this earth, which might seem meaningless at times, is not meaningless. So just thinking along those lines.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay, maybe we will, if anyone has one more question, if anyone is curious.
Actually, I'll
Yep, go for it.
have a clarifying question. I guess like yeah, with like seeking knowledge, like is this in terms of just knowledge of the world, just like creation or things around us, or because knowing like knowledge of knowing more about God is clearly, you know, encouraged.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a little
This, when Solomon is talking of knowledge and wisdom, he's talking about the practical wisdom that he has acquired in the world. You know, the wisdom and knowledge that Solomon had. For example, you know the story of the two women in who came to the court, who lost, and one of them lost their child. You know, he uses great amount of wisdom to find out these things. So he is talking about the wisdom of the world, how to navigate the things of this world. I do not think he is talking about the knowledge of God in this particular context.
sounds good. Thank you.
Excellent. If you have any more questions, feel free to message Roshan on Facebook. He's in our Facebook group. But now we'll probably move forward and just have a time of reflection with praise as we just kind of worship together. Be reminded of these lessons that we've learned in Ecclesiastes. Just making sure that we have time to digest that. So I will share my screen and share the final song.
Immortal, invisible, God only wise, in light inaccessible, hid from our eyes, most blessed, most glorious, the ancient of days, almighty, victorious, thy great name we praise.
Awesome. That was fantastic. Thank you, Roshan, again for leading the study. Now we're just going through some logistics and some announcements. So right off the bat, we just wanted to say that if you are looking for a church to attend to this Sunday, or if you are still curious about Focal Point and North Creek, we are still having Sunday live streams. So North Creek and Focal Point, they both have a virtual and in-person option, whatever you're comfortable with. If you are interested in person for Focal Point, please message Roshan or Kevin. If you are interested in person for North Creek, please hit up me or Yo-Yo. I actually drive there for their 8 a.m. services on Sunday. So if you are interested in that, please message me. I'm sure we can work something out. If you're in the Berkeley area, anyway. But beyond that, we also wanted to kind of ease into our small groups. So I'm pretty sure I have the link somewhere here.